Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to this Virtuoso webinar, Test Automation for CRM Applications. My name is Ryan Thornton, and it is an absolute delight, pleasure, and other words of such effect to host you here as your Master of Ceremonies on this webinar. I am aided and abetted by my partner in test, a man who needs no introduction, but we'll give him one anywhere. He's our sales VP of Solutions Engineering. It's Mr. James Bent.
Ryan Thornton, generous as always. I do like a nice introduction, and as ever, you gave me one. I appreciate it.
Yeah, does anyone need a boiler fixing? Because I'm a gas man. And here we go. So as night follows day, introductions are followed by an agenda. We're going to be looking at the current pressures, the process changes, and kind of how the landscape with new technologies is shifting. So things outside of test automation, new developments are making things that were once impossible possible for a greater number of people. And then, of course, we'll be followed by the important bit, the good bit, where James takes over from my waffle and has a look at the demo of the application itself. So who are we? We are Virtuoso. We ensure that ship gets done faster. Ship happens faster with Virtuoso. And we deliver on the promise of codeless. There's been a lot of false starts and overhype in the world of test automation. But we believe that by using a natural language programming approach, we're able to get reliable functional UI and end-to-end tests of web applications completely codelessly. And we're talking about very dynamic, complex applications and not just the basic stuff. And of course, we aim to get higher quality software. So the winds of change are blowing through the CRM world. Today, they are not just customer databases and sales pipelines. They are highly complex, interactive systems that enable several business-critical functions, multiple business-critical functions. And if your CRM isn't working, I know this from working in marketing, you've got no business. To truly impact a company's sales engine, CRM platforms require test automation that enhances both customer experience and ROI. Has that form been filled? Is that demo booked in? So what's our big idea? What are we bringing to the table here? So we're looking at scaling testing to improve coverage without writing a single line of code or traditional code. We do have a programmatic language, but it's one that you learn in the early years of your schooling. Streamline complex business workflows and enterprise applications, enable cross-functional collaboration across QA and IT teams, and with CRMs actually across the whole commercial team as well, to deliver a world-class customer experience. And with this scripted programmatic test automation approach, your business can automate testing for any CRM platform and any interrelated integrated systems that flow from that to optimize costs and future-proof your CRM systems. At which point I think I will pass over to James for his preamble into his demonstration.
Very good. So right on cue, and I promise it'll be a preamble, not a pre-ramble. There you go. So yeah, let's have a look. So what are we going to see? So we're going to show, so in the context of testing CRM applications, so we're going to look at how you can functionally test multiple browser-based applications for both front and back end, business systems for processing lead and client opportunity data as you're doing in CRMs, how you could use things like email inboxes for notifications and account setups, but then also how you bring in API, so integration testing to those functional journeys. So think when you've got a CRM integrated into your ERP system via an integration, how can you functionally test plus integrations? We'll show you exactly how. And the way we do that, what we're going to show you, how you can use natural language with live authoring. We'll explain what that means to give you real-time feedback. You could build from requirements, execute with plans or CI/CD, with reports, with screenshots, a root cause analysis to focus on debugging. But then a really key thing that we offer is self-healing. So a lot of CRM applications are very dynamic. A lot of things change in the sort of the selectors. We'll show you how our platform uses machine learning to help fix that automatically, but also then how you can run your tests with test data and do parallel testing. An awful lot there, but you know what? We're going to take it a step at a time, make it really easy to do. So without further ado, let us jump in and show you what we're here for, the demo. So I'll share my screen. So this is Virtuoso. We are, as you can see, we're accessing this in a browser. We are a SaaS application. We're in the cloud. We can still test private applications. So where you've got your CRM sitting behind a firewall, that's fine. We have what we call a bridge client. That's used by about 75% of our customers. So what are we looking at? This is a test, what we call a journey, more of an end-to-end flow testing. This is Dynamics 365 to follow more through what a user does, rather than just testing, let's say, individual features. So the scope here for Virtuoso, we are for functional UI, integration, end-to-end testing of browser-based applications, which includes any browser-based CRM, which, you know, a lot of those are in the cloud now. And we enable you to do that testing by authoring tests in natural language. So if I see on screen, there is a next button, then I can come in and author my test and say, click on next. So this is about writing test steps, a lot like you would do with functional test scripts. And the great thing here, though, you don't have to do any setup to be able to start writing these. So for that next button, I don't have to predefine an object or an image to be able to do this. I literally fire up a live browser with my navigate link, and then I can start authoring my tests, creating quite functional steps. So write or click or pick from a drop down. But then also, of course, building in things like assertions. So checking that elements exist, or if I scroll down the bottom here, actually asserting that something meets an expected value, for example. This is test automation after all. So then what you're doing is as I mentioned, you're creating these sort of very user-focused journeys or workflow-focused journeys split into checkpoints. So we have, let's say, the login steps or creating a new account. And we've just introduced the capability now to save these as library checkpoints, which I'll be showing to you in a minute to compose your automation. But another key aspect of this is that as we go through and you run the tests, we're collecting screenshots for all the interactions. So you've got your testing evidence, but then also considering this is testing things like CRM systems, a business application where data is really key. You're then thinking about how you map your data into these tests. So we enable you to, well, of course, write explicit data. So I could be writing my username into the test, but actually would probably say use variables to map your test data. And then it's just a case of deciding, where does that variable come from? Does it come from test data, where I create parameterized data sets? I could upload a CSV file for this. I could come in and say, if I've got really generic data, like I want to create a company name, I can do that on the fly with random data. I could do the same to generate random first names, last names, phone numbers in a pattern. So I can basically generate this data without having to predefine it. But then we do also through the fact you can then embed API calls into your journeys, which are set up in our API manager. So you can configure collections of APIs and map in the inputs and then basically go through and have an API to pass the outputs. You can then build those into your journeys, which could be for data. So at the start of the test, I make an API call to an opportunity endpoint in the CRM to get details of existing opportunities, could be in a certain stage, store those in the response, and then I could use that in my test, use the API response data. So a great way to deal with the fact that most likely as you're testing CRM, data is going to be changing quite frequently as people go in and change records. So this takes away that burden of having to define it. But the great thing here is with the APIs as well is you can, of course, test where there are integrations between systems. So again, it could be CRM to ERP. It could be a front-end portal built on the CRM that integrates through an integration point. You can make API calls, including doing things like I could store data. So it might be store the opportunity ID or order ID that's generated in the CRM into a variable. Then I could come and pass that into my API call, so that dynamic data. And then what I could be doing is asserting, then based on the API response, is the data integrated between the systems? So I'm validating the integration has worked. So this means of combining that functional UI with integration starts enabling you to do this very powerful level of testing across different applications, including things like I can have different tabs open. So you see here, I'm navigating to another website in a new tab. I now have multiple tabs open here. And in this case, what I'm actually doing is extending this to say, at the end of a flow, which could be to generate an opportunity, I might then generate a quotation, which I want to download and send to a customer. And you actually want to test that, let's say you're creating a PDF file. I could go and download that PDF file, could be a link in the application. And then what I want to do is show that on screen and then validate that data or details held on the opportunity or the quote are presented correctly. So I could store the opportunity ID and then assert that it exists on the PDF, for example. So this ability to test multiple systems, integrations, but also documentation that's downloaded is really powerful. And the wonderful thing is that it's really easy to do this. So when we come in, we talked about, we have what we call live authoring. So you can see here, I've navigated to my URL. I've got a live browser window. And now what I'm going to do is start writing test steps. So then again, this is authoring in natural language, where I'm going to write my value. So in this case, my email address. And then I look on screen and I can see it says email phone. So I'm going to write that. So write James B at virtuoso.qa in email phone, click on save. And as I do this, we have a bot which is running that. It's looking in the DOM to locate the email phone, and then it's writing the value in, as you can see has just happened. And if this goes green in conjunction with validating in the interface, I can see it's done it correctly. You've got working automation. So instead of having to kind of capture and then not know if it works, you know straight away, this is going to work. Even if I go on and let's say I click on next, that goes and interacts, we're capturing those screenshots as we go. So I can see what was interacted with. But then on the next screen, I might come in and let's say, I don't know, write james.b at virtuoso.qa. And I look on screen and it's got username, but I spell that horrendously. We're going to try and run this. We're trying to locate an element called whatever that says. It's not there, of course, so it breaks. I now get the ability to click on fix step. I can hover over and say, I meant to click on this, which updates my step, fixes it, runs, fantastic. And that works if I've got things like iframes. So if it breaks and I fix it, would capture the iframe automatically. We also give, for example, here we've got this logo. What if I want to click on that? What's that called? Well, I'm not sure. So what I could do, come into the advanced mode, gives me access to the dev tools. I could then inspect on that icon and see that it is called header logo. That's the class name. So I could copy that and then just say, click header logo. So you see how we're not just fixed on using the text, you can use class names for writing your test steps. So then I can write that step, it goes and interacts. So I've got that easy means to be able to, write my tests, knowing that when I click on I'm done to finalize this, Virtuoso is automatically using the bots to look in the DOM, capture all available selectors, XPaths and IDs and class names for each of those steps, so that you're both knowing that you've got working automation, but you're building a model that keeps this, enabling us to run this the next time. So that's kind of the authoring experience. Now, that's of course, great. I've created my test. That's obviously a short one. But now what we want to do is now, how do we go and then run these? So firstly, you can build out execution plans. So I can come in and I can orchestrate to say, I want to build a plan and I want to be able to decide from which goals. So all of our journeys can be built into goals, which are like test sets. And a goal might align in CRM to a module. So I could have a goal that tests the sales module of CRM. I could then build a regression pack to basically orchestrate and say, which tests from which goal do I want to drop into my execution planner to orchestrate what I'll run? And then either I can schedule this to run. So I could say, I want this to run at a particular time and date and on frequency. But you can also hook this into CI/CD. So from your pipelines, you can call in to run the execution plan and trigger this maybe on each release. Bearing in mind that as you are creating the tests, since we are using natural language and we're not reliant on selectors, you can be building from requirements as well. So you don't even have to wait for the application to be ready. Whether you've got Gherkin syntax requirements or you've got wireframes or you've got whiteboards with the steps written on, I can take those and start creating my automation prior to development or maybe as it's ongoing, so that then I can build this out to say, if I'm looking at the requirements or the wireframes and it says there's click book a demo, then you can have these tests written and then ready to run as soon as you start doing your pipeline releases. So then when we are running these are running on Virtuoso infrastructure, and we're literally firing these up. So if I go ahead and execute this, so imagine this is coming through CI/CD. In the project activity, we then see all of the jobs that are running. So we can see this one's immediately fired up. That's running on Virtuoso grids. If you had multiple tests, we would run them in parallel. And you can see this test starts running through immediately. We've got then fully versioned test results, which are readable. People can come in and pretty easily see what was being done, as well as having the screenshots. So you've got this testing evidence immediately. But also, of course, you can then go in and through your project activities, see things like when tests were run. So you could schedule to look at the particular jobs in a range, look at particular testing goals, testing outcomes to say, well, about 15 minutes ago, this was run and it failed. That's the one I'm interested in. Let's drill into that. I can see it was run on dev environment at 3:04 on the 6th. So now if we drill in, we can see that actually this failed. And we get a couple of things here. So we do get the test step level results. We're also capturing network events and network requests and console logs for steps where those occur. So I could come in and perhaps see that if there are any errors occurring on any steps. But we're also going through, and remember, you could be testing, a lot of CRM systems are very dynamic, Salesforce or Dynamics 365. It means when I'm going through and doing things like loading up a page, the page looks the same. Looks like I'm trying to click on the same button, the My Work, for example, in this case. Behind the scenes, these applications are very dynamic. We have changes occurring, which in this case are actually, we've got class names are changing. We've got XPaths changing. So we've got things that are changing in the background that we might not be aware of. Now, normally that might cause automation to break. Whereas in Virtuoso, every time you see these little sticking plasters or band-aids for our friends over in North America, we see that Virtuoso is using machine learning algorithms to look in and say, look at the previous working model that we captured when the test was last run, then compare to the current model. And if we can see that actually it's the same element, automatically heal that and update the selectors. So all of these steps are tests that are self-healing and basically takes away the burden of having to maintain those manually. But then, so really the important thing here is instead of having to, have lots of test failures, which are actually just because there are genuine dynamic changes, which shouldn't fail a test, you can focus more time on then looking at true failures. In this case, it's an assertion off the back of an API call. So we can see the expected response ID is different. And then we just determine, is that because the expected result is wrong for the test, or is that because the API didn't deliver the correct data? So actually that could tell us it's either a test issue or a development issue. And to help debug that, you've then got a look into the root cause analysis where you can see a summary. Because this is an assertion, it's not capturing page source, network, or logs. But if this were just a normal testing step, we give further technical insights to be able to understand what went wrong. But then further, you can also come in and you can now have an engineer. So bearing in mind we can pass the test execution result back to CI/CD or send a Slack notification, an email notification. Your engineers could then come in, view the outputs, but then also they could rerun the journey. So basically, instead of having to ask, can this be replicated? They can come in and just say, actually, let me come in, maybe put a pause point where it failed, have access into the dev tool. So without me having to manually go through this, I can see if this can be replicated in the exact same way that it was initially run. So it makes it really easy to be able to check if this can be replicated and then sort of go under the hood to see, is this something in the console or something in the network that has, caused this to fail, or actually is this because the test needs to be updated? So you start to build a picture that, again, we're talking about CRM systems here. This is Dynamics, but this is really any browser-based applications, which means this is great. Particularly CRMs aren't existing in isolation. They likely do have some front-end portals, or they have data being fed from other systems, which means you have to actually test across systems. CRMs then might feed data for orders into ERP systems or finance systems. They also feed into other types of applications. So actually to test different flows might mean you have to go across those multiple systems with integrations. So with Virtuoso, because we're pretty system agnostic, but we have definitely ways that you can solution this for systems like CRM, you can start building these very dynamic journeys across applications, data-driven, but incredibly easy to author. The ramp-up time typically for a BA or a functional tester, where engineers can use this, within a couple of days, they will be creating and authoring tests. So hopefully, look, we've given you a pretty good view today of the platform. We have a lot of very satisfied customers, many who are testing on CRM systems. And I'm sure Ryan will, there you go, ask some questions or answers, but also give you some insights of, if you want to know more, we can let you know how.
Okay, so just got a couple in the Q&A applet, I think they call it. First of all, we work with HubSpot, and many of our tests are similar. Do you have a kind of standardized set of tests that can be reused and manipulated?
So what we have, and what I'm just about to show you, is we have a capability which is called library checkpoints, which we are just releasing. And actually, I'll just spin this up on screen to answer that exact question. So what this actually means is that we certainly are starting to build out sort of repositories of standard steps. But to be honest, you can start doing the same thing yourself, because while there's a lot of standardization, there are also configurations. So what this lets you do is to say, where I have simplest one here, my login steps for D365, I can author those, but then I can add them into what we call a library checkpoint. And now what that means, if I go ahead and let's say I create a new journey, then instead of me having to write and say, well, now I've got to write the login steps, I can just look in my checkpoint, find I've got the login steps, drop those in, boom, they just come straight in. If now I want to go to the sales module, I can drop those in, and I just start composing my automation, where certainly we're starting to seed for certain technology platforms like CRMs, like the Dynamics and Salesforce and so on, the basics. But then as you start creating your automation, you drop more of these in. So actually, you actually start composing versus having to write everything. So the answer is sort of a bit 50-50. Yes, we do, but then we make it really easy for you to build your own library of reusable steps.
Yeah, and I think what I take away, and I'm not the solutions engineer here, but what I take away here is two things. And one is that's more meaningful and more scalable, because you still need a person to come in and do things in a sensible way. And equally, when you do have that, you can go further and further and still get the greater ROI there. Good. What browsers do you support for testing?
Yeah, so out of the box for Virtuoso, we support on our infrastructure. We run on headless Chrome browser. But then we also hook into grids where you can then configure device hives. So running through things like browser stack or Lambda test to be able to basically run the same tests on those grids to be able to benefit from all the latest OSs and browsers. And those providers are very good at keeping those up to date, but also having a historical browser versions available. So basically, you can run everything on Chrome. That's typically a great way to do it for your main testing, and then do some cross-browser through the grids at the end.
Excellent, James. That looks like there's no more for no more. So it just remains for me to thank everybody. I know it's there's a lot of competition for webinars and what have you, but thank you everybody for attending, and thank you, as always, James, for your excellent, insightful, and in no way panicked presentation of everything. Wonderful.
And yourself for the good comparing, as always. Yeah.
Great stuff. So, ciao for now.